When I was young, my family lived overseas. I lived in Indonesia for a few years. And my mother, she didn't have the money to send me where all the American kids went to school. But she thought it was important for me to keep up with an American education. So she decided to teach me extra lessons herself, Monday through Friday. But because she had to go to work, the only time she could do it was at 4:30 in the morning. Now, as you might imagine, I wasn't too happy about getting up that early. A lot of times I'd fall asleep right there at the kitchen table. But whenever I'd complain, my mother would just give me one of those looks and she'd say, "This is no picnic for me either, Buster."
God, I wish we had video of that, of those two at the table in the kitchen at 4:30 in the morning, mother and son, to be president. Welcome back to Hardball. That is a story President Obama often told about his mother as he campaigned for president. And it's for most of us, it's about the only story we know about him. Now, as we learn more about his courage and poise President Obama showed in going after bin Laden, we're going to look at the role of his mother, of course, in shaping his values and his worldview. Janie Scott's new book is called A Singular Woman, The Untold Story of Barack Obama's Mother. Janie, thank you so much for writing this book, and I love the picture. I love the looks of this young woman, this young American woman. She's so young, and she had a baby with an African guy, and that's always interesting. The women who step out, you know, go across racial lines, go across cultural lines, and make a big decision. There he is, looking great. Let me ask you, as you did this book, and we're working on it, getting ready for publication with all that involves, what were you thinking of these birthers, these wackos out there that were all questioning whether she actually existed the way we're watching her, actually had American mother having an American kid, and you knew it all as texturized reality, the absolute wall-to-wall truth of it, and you're listening to these jokers. What was your reaction to all that?
It was a little baffling, Chris. I started working on this during the campaign, and the issue did come up then, but it kind of receded. And so it wasn't a preoccupation of mine when I was working on the book. I did, though, in order to do this, I spent 2.5 years. I talked to close to 200 people. Not a single person ever mentioned any knowledge of Ann Dunham having spent any time in Kenya around the time of the birth of her son. So I felt pretty comfortable about that. When it resurfaced, a la Donald Trump, I have to say I was stunned because I thought it was pretty much a settled issue. And when it continued, I went back and reconsidered all the evidence and really came to the conclusion that you and everyone else has come to, that it was a classic conspiracy theory, and all evidence to the contrary that you would think would convince people otherwise was simply viewed as further evidence of a conspiracy.
And for the millionth time, I'll say the only reason you'd engage in such a conspiracy, people way back before he was born, is you intended him to be president someday. This kid, Barack Obama, with an African father. And that was an amazing plan in itself, I have to say, a heroic one. And you didn't have to do it to make it American. He was when he had an American mother. Let's talk about development. I do think Wordsworth is right. The child is father to the man. And we are who we are very young. And we begin to, you meet somebody you went to high school with, they're very much like themselves 50 years later. Some get more pompous, of course, but generally we are who we were when we were kids. When you looked at his birth, growing up with that mom and that dad briefly, what was there that came out later?
Well, he had a very unconventional mother, and that's really the story that I was looking at. What was her life like? This was a person who, kind of broke the rules over and over again. Conceived a child with an African man at a time when nearly half the states in the country had laws against interracial marriage. Went off to Indonesia a couple years after a huge political and social upheaval in which hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Was a single working mother at a time when very few people were doing that in professions, anthropology and international development, in which men had traditionally dominated. So he had a very unusual parenting experience. I think in answer to your question, one of the interesting things that I stumbled upon in Indonesia, where I went several times during the course of working on this, was the notion that there was something almost Javanese about our president. And this is a view you hear from Indonesians, that having gone to school at a critical time in his development between the ages of 6 and 10, in a culture that inculcates self-control in an extraordinary way, that he was marked by that. And there were people there who said he learned his cool, his sang-froid in Indonesia during that period. It's inculcated in children through a culture of teasing, and the notion that you would display emotion is is viewed as a loss of self-control.
So you see him today in that way. You see the president as he behaves in his. He conducts these dark arts of going after a bad guy like we did. You see all that as the cool, that sort of Zen-like behavior.
Well, I do see a cool in him, and as I think most Americans do, many people find it baffling. And he himself has said that this is a product of probably several things, one of which is just innate temperament.
Okay. Jenny, I'm not at all like President Obama. I look up to him in that way, I guess, because I don't know how to behave that way. But you're great to figure this out. I'm sure everybody wants to read. That mother looks so interesting and so engaging. I hope that book sells well. A Singular Woman, about how this mother raised the president. Thank you very much, Jenny Scott.
Thank you,
congratulations.
Chris.